Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It is a big, fancy word that gets thrown around a lot in the bodywork world, and I want to break it down for you guys so it's simple and easy to use and effective for your clients. To make it simple, I first want to break down this big fancy word and define what is really going on when you perform a PNF. And then second, I want to break down the steps for you and show you that once you've figured this out, you can apply this to any muscle on the body. PNFs are widely known as an active assisted stretching technique that gets muscles to elongate a little bit more than they already can. But if we break down the words, we're really looking at facilitating the neuromuscular component of our proprioception. I'm going to start at the back. So to facilitate something is to make something easier. That's what we're doing. Our job is to make this process easier for our client. Neuromuscular just means relating to nerves and muscles. So facilitating the communication between the muscles and the nerves, either from the nerves to the muscles or from the muscles to the nerves. And nerves, as you know, are the communication pathway between the brain and every other part of the body. So in this case, we're just clearing the line between the muscles and the brain. Proprioception, if you ask me, is the coolest part about this whole equation. So we have these specialized nerve cells that are called proprioceptors, and they give our brain information about where we are and how we're moving in space, which is really cool. So the whole idea behind a PNF is to facilitate the way that our proprioceptors communicate to the brain. PNFs are designed to trick our brain into helping our proprioception work better, receive information better, and then help our muscles to perform more optimally. Exactly how do you do this, you ask? Good question. Don your best cape, a little sleight of hand, and smoke and mirrors, and you're good to go. Just kidding. Step 1, isolate the muscle or group of muscles that you want to target. Step 2, bring those muscles into a stretch. Not an overstretch, just a stretch. And then bring it back just a little bit, about 20%. Step 3, provide a resistance and ask those muscles to fire. Not a full-on fire. This is not a full-out war. This is just a small engagement. So a good protocol is to ask your client to use about 20% of their energy. Step 4, have your client hold that resisted contraction for about 5 to 8 to 10 seconds. Depending on your school of thought, you're really just waking these muscle fibers up. So how long you hold this resisted contraction is up to you. Step 5, have your client relax those contracted muscles, and you then assist those muscles into a deeper stretch. At this point, you can repeat steps 1 through 5 with the starting point of the stretch being a little bit deeper each time. Okay, let's see what this looks like in real life. Oh yeah, step -1, get out your favorite butter. So I've got my client on the table and I've decided that the first muscles I'm going to target are the muscles that bring the neck into lateral flexion. So mostly the upper traps and the levator scapula. The next step is to stretch those muscles out. So I'm bringing her left ear to her left shoulder, and then I'm going to ask her to bring her right ear to her right shoulder against my resistance. I'm using my right palm here as the resistance, and this is where you would count for your client the amount of time that you want them to hold this contraction. Once they've let go, you're going to push those muscles into a slightly deeper stretch. And as always, this is a good opportunity to ask your client to take a nice big deep breath. Check in, make sure your client's doing okay, make sure there's no subconscious holding going on, and then on to the next step. You want to bring that joint into a deeper stretch than it was the first time, and then, like I said in the very beginning, repeat steps 1 through 5. So provide the resistance, have them hold the contraction, and then stretch those muscles out one more time. With the neck especially, you want to make sure that nothing is pinching on the opposite side. So ensure that these movements and actions are not creating any more pain for your client. That would just defeat the whole purpose. And then for a third time, I'm repeating all of those steps. So in this last motion, I'm bringing her left ear to her left shoulder at the farthest possible position, creating the longest stretch for those right side muscles. Isolating and firing these muscles in slightly different positions is what wakes up the proprioceptors and starts to rekindle that connection back to the brain. So I'm done with the actual PNF and I'm starting to do a little extra work here, which is the great part about being a massage therapist. I'm leaving this in the video because I think it's important that we incorporate different techniques to manage a certain issue or dysfunction. And as a massage therapist, we have the ability to kind of take our time and utilize different modalities to make sure that the varying levels of what's going on for the client's soft tissue are met. So in this particular instance, I'm trying to create more space in the shoulder and the neck area, and I'm using this newfound length to draw some myofascial strokes down the scalenes, separating out the fibers of the upper traps and the levator scapula, and ensuring that these muscles can now hold a more optimal, less dysfunctional position for my client. So you can now apply this technique to any muscle on the body. You've just got to know the origin, the insertion, and the action of those muscles. But I'm going to demo how to do a PNF on a handful of muscles: the quads, the psoas and the hip flexors, the glute medius, the QL, and the calves. Starting with the quads. So knowing that I have to bring this muscle into a stretch, that's impossible to do with my client supine on the table. I've asked my client to move close to the edge of the table where I'm standing, and I'm going to bring her leg off the table. I'm giving her a couple of options to do this. She can either hold her own drape or I can hold it for her. But once her leg is off the table, now I can flex her knee and create length in the quads. Figuring out how to resist a contraction is not always easy, but for this position, I like to use my own leg. So once I've got my leg hooked against her lower leg, I'm instructing her to swing her lower leg out straight, which is extension of the knee, and that is the main action of the quads. So when she kicks into my leg, the quads are contracting, and when she releases, I can use my leg to bring those quads into a stretch. This is definitely not how it has to be done, and you can even squat down and use your hands as the resistance. This might even give you a little bit of a deeper stretch for the quad muscles. And in a little bit, I'm going to actually show you another alternative to perform a PNF on the quads from the side lying position. But before I do that, I just want to reiterate that you want to repeat those 5 steps at least 3 times, more if you feel like is necessary, and then of course add to it any work that you feel like might be beneficial. Oh hey, look, side lying. I've got my client tucked in with a side lying drape, which I will include the link to that video in the description, but I actually usually recommend that my client wears athletic shorts if I know I'm going to perform this PNF in a session. So for this technique, I've got my client close to the edge of the table again, and I'm really isolating the psoas and the hip flexors, or the muscles that are going to bring the knee up to my client's chest. I'm hooking my hip into her sacrum so that she doesn't fall off the table and that there's a counter pressure in the sacrum keeping the posterior spine open. From here, I'm holding her leg at the knee and the ankle, and as I twist my own body, I'm pulling her leg back towards me, and to perform the PNF, asking her to bring her knee to her chest. This is going to contract those hip flexors, and then when she releases, I can pull back into an even deeper stretch. I'm skipping the rest of the steps here, but this is where you would rinse and repeat. You'll see the ceiling cam perspective of this in a second, but this is also a great position for the quads for your clients who are really flexible. From this position, to isolate the quads instead of the hip flexors, I'm not going to twist my own body. I'm just going to use my right arm here to pull the ankle back towards me or towards her hip. And at this point, I'm asking her to kick her knee straight again, holding that resisted contraction, and then stretching her quads out for that deeper stretch. If that position feels too difficult for you mechanically, you can offer your client's leg a bolster under his or her knee, and then standing at the end of the table, push the ankle back towards the glute, performing the PNF from there, or standing behind the client again, using your hand to support the client's low back, pulling the ankle up and creating that PNF stretch from there. Whatever approach you use is totally up to you, but I will say this: one of the quadricep muscles actually crosses the hip, so the side lying position is a little more encompassing for this technique. Side lying is also a really great position to address the glute medius for all sorts of techniques, but we're sticking to the PNF for this one. And she's not only close to the edge of the table, but also on a bit of a diagonal, so that as I pull her leg back to drop off the table, she's reaching forward and grabbing onto the far corner to support herself and to allow her hips a little more movement. The main action of the glute medius is a abduction, so pulling your client's leg into a deduction to stretch out the glute medius can be a little tricky. This is why side lying is the best for this technique. And once you've got your client here, it's important to really secure the top of the hip, so when she brings her leg up to contract the glute medius, you're isolating the glute medius and giving her space to relax the muscles of the low back. Just to be a little clear about the specific steps of this PNF, I've got my left hand on my client's hip to isolate the glute medius, and I've got my right hand just above her knee, and using that hand to supply resistance as she brings her right leg up towards the ceiling to contract the glute medius. Once she releases, I'm pushing down to provide a little extra stretch. And then of course any extra work you want to do in the glute medius while you're here is awesome. Moving away from the hip and into the low back, I want to isolate the QL, so I'm going to map out the attachment sites of this muscle. And then really what I want to do is make sure my client can feel the muscle that I'm trying to target. Most people don't know exactly where the QL is, and have her engage the entire lateral portion of her core. So when she lifts her leg up away from the floor and towards the ceiling, she's also hiking her hip up towards her shoulder. The hip hike is going to be the action that engages the QL, but calling into action all of the muscles along this lateral part of the body is definitely helpful for the proprioception for this entire group. It's a little hard to see here, but when she lets go, I'm using my left hand to push her hip down away from her shoulder, allowing that stretch of the QL to happen. This next technique is another alternative to target the QL, and it's actually my preferred method for a PNF in this area. I've still got my client inside lying, and I'm at the end of the table holding onto her ankle and her lower leg. And as I lean back, I'm asking her to hike her hip up towards her shoulder like she did before, but this time it's less engaging for the other muscles around the hip and the back and can pinpoint the QL more specifically. Like I did before, it's a good idea to palpate this muscle before you start so your client knows exactly what muscle they're going to feel fire. The last and final muscle or group of muscles I'm going to target for this video are the calf muscles, so the gastrocs and the soleus. I've got my client's feet dangling off the end of the table and using my thighs to create a pressure against the ball of her foot. So as I stretch the calves out, she is pressing into my foot to create that contraction, and when she releases, I'm able to stretch those muscles out. And one more time, just for kicks, do a little work here, incorporate some other techniques, and your client will feel taken care of and definitely come back for more.